Yeah, we're only two of them.
So this is, I got the order, run a show here. So Steve, I'll call Steve up.
You told me to come up here.
Yeah. So I'm gonna call Steve up, and then after Steve goes, Steve, can you call? Steve,
Yeah.
Can you call Adam when you're done?
Okay.
Kevin. Or Kevin's here.
Nope.
We call Adam also.
Yeah.
Many things. Good, how are you?
Do you want us to go down?
And then Kevin, when you're
All
done.
right, you don't mind.
That way
Do you want to be
it's-
outside? I can be
Okay.
outside.
Okay, so.
And now, are there gonna be questions or what?
Well, no, I'm just doing this because you got three on that side, three on this side.
One.
Okay.
This wall.
Specifically, or Steve,
Steve should.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you want Steve here?
Steve,
And then you wanna go-
Yeah, so after we're done, yes, when you're speaking, you'll turn it back to me, and then if there's questions for you, I'll just step aside and you come back to the
I
podium.
don't see my name, but
Yeah.
I have final pen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your title? Say again? What's your title? The treasurer is my full-time title. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Good, good. I feel like somebody should make a joke. It got quiet in there.
Don't make a joke, especially you.
This be a barnyard joke.
Comedy's a controversial thing these days. Steve, you ready? Let me know when you're ready. Ready to rock? All right. We're going to start in the interest of time, both mine and all of yours, and my colleagues in government who have joined us here today. I want to thank members of the media. I am New York State Senator Rob Ort, Senate Republican leader. I also am here in my capacity as representative for District 62, which covers all of Niagara, all of Orleans, and the western portions of Monroe County. And I want to thank my colleagues, specifically Steve Brew, Monroe County Republican caucus leader, who you'll hear from, as well as other Monroe County legislators, as well as we have members of the Locust Club who are here today, and some other local officials. We're here today to talk about another press conference, but sort of the larger concept of this sanctuary city policy nonsense. And we think of a lot of times New York City when we hear about this, and certainly they're the largest and maybe the most prolific sanctuary city in the state of New York, but they are not alone, as we saw the other day. So a couple nights ago, Homeland Security officers pulled over a truckload of 8 people who were here in this state, in this country illegally, and they requested assistance. Is the story that I have from Rochester Police. Rochester Police responded to the scene. They did not play the role of immigration officials, but they were responding to another law enforcement entity, which happens all the time. Sheriff's deputies call Rochester Police. Rochester Police, no doubt, calls local police officers to help them often secure a scene or assist in what's going on. And not surprisingly, law enforcement does this all the time, and they should. They should. Because every law enforcement agent out there, whether you're a Rochester police officer, Monroe County Sheriff's deputy, a Homeland Security immigration official, or a local police officer, at the end of the day, you're all trying to do a very dangerous job and get home back to your family. And they all took an oath to the Constitution of the United States and the state of New York. Sanctuary city and the idea of it is essentially the undermining of federal immigration law. That's what this is. Cities do not get to choose which laws they abide by or which laws they don't, any more than a city could say, we're not going to abide by Second Amendment laws. In the state of New York, we have many. Other places, they don't. But places can't just say, we're not going to follow that law. And most people would say that's not a good idea. And they'd be right. The notion that the mayor and the chief would not only, I guess, reprimand these officers for doing their job, but that they would publicly shame them. That didn't have to happen. I would have been less surprised had I heard, through the grapevine that these officers were called in and they were said, hey, we don't do that here. You shouldn't have done that. Here's what you should have done instead. If that had been handled that way, which, by the way, is how most discipline happens, I guess so be it. I could disagree with the policy, and I do vehemently, but so be it. But that's not what happened. The mayor thought it was important to grandstand, because he's in a Democratic primary. He thought it was important to get the chief of police up there to publicly shame and reprimand 10 Rochester police officers who did their job. You don't have to like their job out there, but they did their job, which is partly protecting you, enforcing the law, responding to other law enforcement entities. It happens every single day, and I'm glad it happens, even if some people aren't. In a city racked by crime, in a city racked by violence, in a city spiraling down from a cost of living standpoint every day. And don't tell me it's not happening, because the metrics would tell you it is. The mayor thought it was important to portray the Rochester police officers who responded as the bad guys instead of his administration. Those officers fulfilled their oath because they didn't forget what their oath was. The elected leaders of this city have forgotten their oath. You don't get to choose which. You want to change federal law? Run for Congress. Run for president. Now, I know the city of Rochester is not alone in these sanctuary city policies, but people need to understand what that is. And I want to be very clear. These officers didn't respond. They weren't immigration officers. They weren't asking them about their legal status. That is not what happened. They responded to a call, and they were assisting Homeland Security professionals in doing their job. And their job is to find folks who are here illegally, and if they don't have the proper papers, if they don't have the proper documents, to begin deportation proceedings. And that also goes to preventing human smuggling, to prevent people from being exploited who are here illegally by others, people who are raped and taken advantage of. And I won't even get into things like Lakin's Law. Lakin Riley, of course, teenager in Georgia, killed by Jose Ibarra. Jose Ibarra was here illegally, was arrested in New York City, was arrested for violating a different law, at least allegedly. He was released. ICE was not given any notification. He never showed up for court, went to Georgia, and he ended up killing and was convicted of killing Lakin Riley. So I would tell anyone out there, sanctuaries, when we talk as elected officials, my job is to provide a sanctuary for someone like Lakin Riley, not for Jose Ibarra. I'm not interested in providing a sanctuary for someone like that. And unfortunately, whether intended or not, that is what ends up happening. You provide sanctuary for people that you don't know, you can't vouch for, that are here illegally. But aside from the sanctuary policy, I want to get back to the notion that we would publicly shame and repudiate officers. You know how hard it is to find police officers? I bet the mayor could tell you. I bet Rochester has a hard time finding people who want to do this job. I know they do. I know everyone across the state of New York has a hard time. You want to know why? There's stuff like this. Because the people who used to be the good guys are now portrayed as the bad guys. We have to re-educate them on the policy of the city of Rochester. And here I thought they were just supposed to do the job that they swore to do: protect and serve, assist fellow law enforcement. So it really frustrated me. I'll be honest, it angered me. I don't represent the city of Rochester, but it angered me because to see this happening so close, I'll be very blunt. I can't believe how far the city of Rochester has moved down this path. I really can't. When I see New York City doing it, maybe I'm just desensitized. I've come, and even they have wrangled with it. Even they have a mayor who has said, I might have to work with federal immigration on this issue because we have hundreds of thousands of people who are here illegally. But again, politics is a funny thing. Primaries are a funny thing. They get people to do weird things. But to stand up there, clearly, in my view, the chief was there because the mayor, there was pressure there. He was there present to put the pressure on, to have that press conference, to call out those officers and say, and I don't even know who is really asking, who is asking for that press conference? Who is out there saying, I hope the mayor addresses this. I hope I find out what happened with those RPD officers responding. Where is that even coming from? So it is really a disgrace that is what passes now for a press conference from a mayor or for any elected official to shame Rochester or shame any police officer from doing their job. I hope, I'm going to say this, I hope federal funding is on the table at the highest level. The city of Rochester probably gets a lot of federal funding. I don't know how much they get. I bet they get a lot. And you know what? Maybe that's how you remind them of their obligation to the Constitution and to law. Maybe that's the only thing possible. That if they know they will not continue, you don't get to flout federal law, shame public safety officers, law enforcement officers, and then still get millions of tax dollars to continue to do whatever is going on. So maybe that's the only way you get their attention. I would say the state of New York should do the same, but I'm not going to hold my breath. There's plenty of things we can do at the state. We could pass Lakin's Law, which is sponsored by Senator Lanza in the Senate, sponsored by Assemblyman Jarrett Gandolfo in the Assembly. It is a law that has been in existence before Laken Riley was murdered. We renamed it for her, but it's a law. These are, because sanctuary policies very often are a conglomeration of laws that result in providing sanctuary to those in the country and in the state illegally. So, I hope the president of the federal administration looks at this and considers that when they're talking about federal funding. And I know that would hurt. And some people say, well, that seems mean. It's no more mean. It is no more petty. It is no smaller than standing up and shaming 10 officers who did their damn job. You should do yours, Mr. Mayor. And at this time, I want to call up Steve Brew, Monroe County Republican caucus leader, to say a few words. Steve?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Steve.
Before I begin my remarks, I'd just like to say that I've been a county legislator going on 10 years now, and through the course of the 10 years, there's been many press conferences. And as Senator Ort, the tone of his remarks to the media and to the community out there, they're angry. We're all angry, okay? Because this rises above most other type of issues that we publicly have an opportunity to talk about. This is about a police department and the people that you work for not having your back. Those police officers went out that night when it's a call for assistance. It's an unwritten rule. I don't care if it's a military or if it's a law enforcement organization, they call for help. That gold shield tells them a need to have their back. In this case, they did the right thing. I'm extremely disappointed. If it was politics that the mayor was playing, well, shame on him. And I'll begin with my remarks. And, if I share the same type of, tenacity and anger in my voice, I don't apologize for that, because it's something that myself and all of my colleagues up here, as well as all my legislative colleagues up here, certainly share, the same feelings that I do. So again, thank you, Senator Ort. Proud to stand with you and my fellow Republicans, conference members here at the Locust Club, in support of the brave men and women of the Rochester Police Department and of all their law enforcement partners. What happened here is straightforward. A federal law enforcement agency requested backup, and local officers responded. That's exactly how public safety is supposed to work. It should be expected, not condemned, that officers respond when fellow law enforcement is in need. Law enforcement officers don't stop to think about politics when someone, especially fellow officers, calls for help. What they do, they respond. That's exactly what RPD did, and they deserve our thanks and full support, not chastising from the mayor, their boss, and some other political people within the city council. For Democrat elected officials to condemn, reprimand, or even threaten disciplinary action against officers who backed up federal agents is not just shameful, it's dangerous. It sends a chilling message to every officer that's doing the right thing, could cost them their career. That kind of leadership doesn't just demoralize law enforcement lives, it endangers lives. And this is dangerous. Anti-law enforcement rhetoric isn't isolated to the city hall, as we all know. At this month's county legislator meeting, several Democratic legislators voted against accepting a Homeland Security grant for Operation Stone Garden, a program that has supported law enforcement for nearly 2 decades in our area in the fight against human trafficking, drug smuggling, and illegal guns crossing our northern border, which we all know would be Lake Ontario. On top of that, one Democratic legislator is now suggesting she may submit legislation to extend the city's sanctuary policy across the entire county of Monroe. Let me be clear. The Republican conference will fight in every mechanism at our disposal. Let me also say that a proposal such as that is preposterous. I know the other side of the aisle quite well. She might have 3 or 4 votes, supportive votes in that, but even most Democrats on the other side of the aisle have enough common sense to never, ever support something like that. And I can promise, without a doubt, that the Republican side of that legislative floor would roll up our sleeves and go to work at every opportunity we had, every mechanism that we had at our disposal to fight that, even prevent this horrid piece of legislation from ever reaching the floor. It's time for every resident, whether they live in the city or any of our towns, to stand up and say enough is enough. No one is above the law, not even a so-called sanctuary city. Federal agents are carrying out a lawful operation. RPD stepped in as they are trained to do and acted professionally. Those now trying to politicize this moment to serve an anti-police, open borders agenda are sending a dangerous message that officers should hesitate or stand down when it matters the most. We will not tolerate a culture where law enforcement is villainized for doing exactly what they're sworn to do, or where those break the law or prioritize over law-abiding citizens. In this situation, it wasn't political. It was a public safety response, and for which we fully support. The Republican Conference of the Monroe County Legislature stands firmly with the men and women of RPD today and every day. We trust our officers, we respect their judgment, and we will always back them when they act to keep our communities safe. Our families deserve law enforcement that defends the rule of law, not ones that turns it back on their fellow officers. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kevin of the Rochester Police Locust Club. Oh, yes, and I'd also like to introduce Robert Colby, our legislator from out in Ogden mostly, Jackie Smith, representing the west side of the county, Clarkson, Hamlin, and Sweden. And is there anybody I missed up here? Oh, I didn't know, sorry. Mr. Rick Mill, who does an excellent job of representing points southeast of the county, Mendon in the Pittsford area, and I think parts of Rush.
Yeah, Virginia.
Who else did I miss?
Virginia.
Virginia McIntyre, who represents the entire town of Gates and just a little bit of Greece. So welcome, my fellow, and Frank. We have Frank sneak in here later on. Frank Ciardi, who represents the Penfield area, and my fellow legislators up here. They're all firmly behind what we're speaking out against today. And as I said before, if there's work to be done in that legislature opposing any type of Democratic initiative which would seek to introduce any type of a sanctuary city status to the county would be DOA.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your support, guys. So my name is Kevin Leckinger. I'm here on behalf of the Rochester Police Locust Club. My job here is to kind of speak on behalf of our members. So contrary to what's been portrayed in the media this week, our members have to follow the general order, and they're not allowed to speak up for themselves, and they do follow those policies, as well as the one I hold in my hand, which is the the esteemed General Order 502. So since they can't speak up for themselves, and that's kind of my job today, I'm just going to read from you. It's 8 pages, but I'm going to read to you one paragraph. Procedures to contact, request, or provide assistance to CBP or ICE. These procedures do not apply to joint investigations or task force investigations in which CBP or ICE is participating. In situations involving an imminent threat to life or safety, example, calls for backup, officer in trouble, or response to a crime in progress. So now that that internal investigation is concluded and clears our officers based on that paragraph right there, let's talk about the rest of this week. The public criticism by the mayor and the chief of our officers before an investigation was I won't even say concluded, before it's even started, is certainly disappointing. Those officers have still showed up for work. They received the additional training on this document here, and then they went right back to work. And like I said on the radio earlier today, they're good men, they're good women, and they're just answering the call for help. So that's all they want to do. This wasn't political. This wasn't about immigration. This was about backing up other officers, making sure the scene was safe. And as soon as it was safe, they left the scene, which is in compliance with this order. So that's just the message I want to portray for our members. And thank you for coming and listening to that brief message.
Kevin, thank you, my friend.
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Kevin, that's short and sweet. That's the best speech anyways. But I want to thank Kevin. I want to thank all the RPD Locust Club members for what they do every day, not just having us here today, but for what they do. I want to thank Steve. And again, all my colleagues, some of whom I know, some of whom I didn't, which is why I wanted Steve because he knows where they represent and all that information that I may not. So, but I want to thank all of them for being here today. And I'll just close and we'll take questions. I think that is key. I can sort of talk, and I'm happy to, about my feelings about that order, sanctuary policies, why it's dangerous, why it is wrong, and all of that. I was just with Tom Homan a couple weeks ago, and he said, for communities who do not assist us or actively impede us, that's just going to result in more border agents, more ICE, more in your community. We're going to send more people to do the job that you normally locally would assist us with doing. So if we have to send 100 agents, then so be it. We'd like to just send 4 or 5, and then obviously working with locals to just assist them. But I think it's important that what Kevin mentioned there. Apparently the mayor doesn't even know his own order, because that's pretty straightforward. This was a responding to a call, backing up something that was already going on, a stoppage that had already taken place. So it's always a good idea to know your own orders, know what's already been put out there before you go out and castigate those who are protecting and serving professionals like those officers at the RPD. And again, if the mayor wants more federal immigration officials here, this is a good way to go about doing that. Because I'm certain that Tom Homan, a New Yorker from the North Country, I'm sure he pays attention. In fact, I know he does to what goes on here. And this is already getting bigger news. I'm glad we have our local news here, but this was in New York newspapers. I'm sure by now it's already in national headlines. And it won't be long in the day of the internet, it'll be international. And so I'm sure federal officials, including the person at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, will be paying attention to this. So with that, I will open it up to questions. I would just ask if you could say where you're from, what station or what network or agency. And then if you have a question that's directed at somebody, just say who the question is directed to, and we'll do our best to answer it.
Senator, just a point of clarification, Adam Chodak with News 8 here in Rochester. You said up top that the people in the van were here illegally. I might have missed something along the way. There's been a lot of different press releases and whatnot. Do you know for a fact that they were here illegally or undocumented? Because at this point, I'm unsure of what their status was.
My understanding is that they were stopped by Homeland Security because there was either a question about human smuggling or a question about their legal status. That was the reason for the stop. As to the legal status of all 8 of the people in there, I don't know that for sure, but that is my understanding.
Do you know what the conclusion of that investigation
I do
was?
not. I do not.
And then one point that I'm hearing, even from some officers, is that while responding to this was perfectly fine. Once they got there, there was a question as to whether it was necessary. Was there an emergency?
Right.
We've seen the video and everyone seems pretty calm.
Mhm.
And so what should have happened after that appears to be from the police chief the question at hand. And I guess that whether it's legal or illegal, should the Homeland Security folk have called them in if there wasn't an emergency?
So I guess the question, that's probably a better question for the Homeland Security folks, because I wasn't on the ground. But I think it's my knowledge, having been a former mayor and having been in the military, not a law enforcement officer, is very often it is not uncommon to reach out to local law enforcement to secure a scene, especially if you're gonna be out there time consuming. For instance, at a fire, you have fire police, you have people directing traffic. No one questions when you see all that police presence. It doesn't mean that someone's necessarily bleeding out or there's some massive emergency, but I think it's standard operating procedure that you want to have that scene controlled. And my understanding is they didn't have the amount of officers to maybe do that. And so there was a call that was put out to the Rochester Police Department. The funny part is, Adam, I think we can get into the weeds, but what frustrates me is, how are we at a point in our country's history that local law enforcement being asked to respond to a scene where you have federal law enforcement? How is that problematic? Why is that so problematic? They were simply, HSI was doing their job that we asked them to do. If Rochester responded and the Monroe County Police or Monroe County Sheriff showed up to help them, we wouldn't even be wasting our time on this topic. So it just, to me, again, I wasn't there. I've never been a Homeland Security person, so I can't speak to what constitutes an emergency for them or a reason for backup. But I know in my time in public office, it is very common for one law enforcement agency to call for assistance to another. I don't think that always means that someone's in danger, but you're trying to prevent that. You're trying to secure a scene and make sure that you have enough officers there. If there's paperwork, if there's things that have to happen on the side of a road or whatever, I'm sure that additional presence maybe helps secure that site. I would let law enforcement professionals maybe answer sort of the operational aspect of that. But I just think the idea that it's so controversial that they even called, that they responded. Now, again, what happened after that? I can tell you this: nothing happened from my vantage point that would be a violation of their professional responsibilities. Nothing. They didn't ask their immigration status. They didn't, help in assisting hauling them away to a federal detention center. None of that occurred. And they did not make the initial stop. And usually that's where the sanctuary policy comes in, is that local law enforcement in that sanctuary jurisdiction is not allowed to maybe make the initial stop or the inquiry as to your legal status, right? If there is a stop, let's say a traffic stop or whatever it is. But I can tell you, up in Niagara County, the sheriff, they've stopped many people coming over through the river. And I can tell you that I've never seen this happen there. I've never seen the sheriff or the county legislature stand up and say, we need to retrain our officers because last night there were some folks that were stopped by Border Patrol, let's say, and they responded, and that's a problem. And if it was, I'll just go back to this, Adam, and I'll shut up on this, but there's other ways to handle this. If I was the mayor, what would happen? You would bring the chief in. You'd say, what happened? He would say, there's an investigation, or we have to do an investigation. We think this is what occurred from body cam footage or whatever. Okay, bring these guys in, and you, the chief of police, have a private discussion with them about whatever. To go out live, it just begs the question, why? What was the demand to do that? That's why we're really here. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't be here talking about this. And so I just don't know what begged the need to go wide to the press on that.
It's interesting. I'm sorry. Please.
No, this is an ironically role reversal, but I was hoping that you could expand on the reason for that area that Kevin expanded on And how backup is done, I think we're missing one of the major points a little bit, and I think it needs to get expanded on, because obviously some people might not understand this. Had these people taken off and weren't curtailed to find out all the facts, that's what law enforcement does, protects us, and went flying down Lake Avenue or turned around and went down Ridge Road, who knows what they would have ran into, who they would have hit, who might have suffered. And I think we need to explain to the public that this isn't a punishment. This is how we protect the public, which is the job of every law enforcement agency across the government.
And maybe
So
the police
expound on
officer
that,
up here
I think it'll be good.
could address that a bit better than I could. I know, ironically, I was here in Rochester a couple months ago. Yeah, several months ago. And it was the night that there was a stolen car. And the gentleman stole a car, and as he was on a high-speed chase with the cops, killed an elderly man in a car accident. So I think, very often, if you'd want to have a certain number of police officers, depending on the stop and how many people, and I'm sure all of that factored in, Adam, to that reason for that call to go out. But again, I'm not going to sit there and say that I know all the SOPs for HSI, but I don't think calling for assistance, I think that's a very common thing, and I'm sure there's a variety of reasons why that can be. I don't think you want to wait always till it's gotten so bad. I think you want to do it preventatively sometimes, and then after a few minutes, the scene is cleared and everyone moves along their way and they go back to their job. And I think that probably in a different circumstance would have been how this would have proceeded. And Kevin, I don't know if I'm missing or if you want to add anything to that.
I'll add very briefly. So I've looked at some of the media coverage of this incident and some of the cell phone coverage and things like that. And one thing I only saw once, and I wish I saved it. I don't know if one of the news sources here showed it, but there was a cell phone video of a fight that took place between the HSI agents and the occupants of the van prior to the call for help and emergency, the emergency call for help for our PD officers. So federal agents were in a physical fight with occupants. Did you say there were 8 in the van?
Mm-hmm.
8 occupants in the van. I'm not saying every one of them fought, but there's many federal agents, 8 occupants in the van, and there's a physical fight on the side of the road. That seems like something that is an emergency to me. People are not complying with lawful orders from federal agents. That's an emergency. And then upon RPD's arrival, all they did was just make sure the scene was secure, everybody was safe, and then they left as soon as they could. I promise you, those cops didn't go there to their shift that day or to that call and want to get involved in this controversy. They just want to show up, take their calls, help the people of the city of Rochester, and safely go home every night. This is more than they bargained for at this point. But there was a fight there, and I haven't seen too much media coverage about that because, unfortunately, I think the media coverage that would show that there was a fight and RPD should kind of respond and maybe help out a little bit would justify our officers' actions a little bit more. And unfortunately, right now, it doesn't seem like people really want to justify our officers' actions, even though they are justified both in what they actually did because of the fight and based on the letter of the law of our policy.
After this, Kevin, I have not seen that video. I'd love for you to point that to me.
I'll look around. I saw it once. I don't know what news channel it was. From the perspective, it was kind of the looking forward down the passenger side of that van. There were several HSI agents at the passenger side, whether it be the front door, the back door, or sliding door, whatever. In a physical confrontation, pulling people out of the van, tumble down to the ground, some rolling around with people on the ground, and then still people in the car. So yeah, I think a physical fight between law enforcement and occupants of a vehicle would rise to the level of an emergency that they could use some backup for. And for whatever it's worth, in terms of RPD responding to this one particular incident for a few minutes to make sure everybody's safe, I personally have been at 16 officer-involved shootings in my career. And at every single one of those, federal agents have showed up to help out. They take a traffic point, they help us surround a house, they do whatever they need to do to help make sure that our officers go home safe. So the least we can do is just make sure that they get to go home safe as well. That's all we did. We don't care about their immigration status. We're not violating this policy. We made sure that everybody there, the occupants of the vehicle, the HSI agents, and then of course ourselves, went home safely.
I'd love to see that. That would be news to me. I think the last question from me, at least, is more a response to the observation that we call it Sanctuary City. At the same time, you speak to the Wayne County Sheriff, and he says we're not in the business of enforcing federal law. He'll respond if there's an emergency, but outside of that, he's not going to go looking to, and it's mainly a resource issue that he talks about. What would be your thoughts on that? Because we label it a sanctuary city. A lot of people don't know what that is, or it varies based on city by city.
Sure.
But you do have more conservative counties in our area that have taken, to me, a stance that borders, no pun intended, close to a sanctuary city policy.
I think there's a key difference. It's one thing to say we're not in the business of enforcing, meaning they're not their primary focus is not people in the country illegal or legally. Now, if they make a traffic stop and they find someone who's here illegally, they're still probably going to notify federal agents, say, hey, we got a guy here, issue a detainer, and that whole process. Sanctuary policy, that's the difference. You're in the business of actively undermining federal immigration law. That's the big difference. It's one thing to say, I'm not waking up every day to go do Border Patrol's job, because you're not. And I would concur that there's a resource issue there. They don't have the manpower to do that expressly. But to expressly, sanctuary policies expressly the intent, and I've debated them on the Senate floor, the intent is to protect those here illegally from federal immigration authorities, to protect them from deportation. That is why they exist. And so that's a very different sort of, to me, that's a very clear difference. One is sort of, I guess you might say, an active omission. One is an active commission, right? You don't have the resources. I get what the Wayne County Sheriff is saying, maybe inartfully, that, hey, I don't have the manpower. We're not running around looking at farms doing the job of Border Patrol. But I'd be willing to bet if he pulled a vehicle over and found, two people in the trunk, or found a guy driving the car that was not here illegally, I don't know that he is saying, I'm not going to notify federal immigration officials that we have someone here in the country illegally. There's another contact with law enforcement, and you might want to follow up on this situation because this person doesn't appear to be here legally. In Rochester, and this isn't attacking anybody here, but they're basically told you can't do that. You cannot notify ICE of anyone's legal status, whether you are not, or suspect they are. And so that's a very big difference. This is not about the law is the law. For years, Democratic presidents, Barack Obama led the nation in history in deportations. Bill Clinton talked about this was never controversial until Donald Trump got elected. If Donald Trump said oxygen is good, there are some Democrats that would hold their breath. That is just the new reality we live in. And so they are willing to go to undermine the law. The funny part is American people on this issue overwhelmingly spoke this last election cycle. Most people do not support the idea of an open border policy or sanctuary policies where we don't enforce immigration law. There's all kinds of risks to the public. There's all kinds of strain on resources. There's all kinds of good reasons why you could say that enforcing the law is the right thing. And by the way, this young man here, his job is to enforce existing law. He doesn't have to like half of them, but his job is to enforce it. If Mayor Evans or someone else wants to change a law, then there's ways to do that. But that is not ignoring a law or working to ask law enforcement to not cooperate. That's what you're asking them. Don't cooperate. Don't bother to call us HSI. Don't bother to call us Border Patrol. Don't bother, because we're not going to respond. I just think that's wrong. And if we were talking about any other facet, most people would say that's wrong. But for some reason on this facet, we get all wrapped around sanctuary policy and, maybe it's about enforcing the law. I'm not asking anybody to do a job they can't do. But if you get a phone call or a call for emergency from Border Patrol that they need assistance, how could you ask a law enforcement officer to not respond to a fellow law enforcement officer in the commission of their job? I just think that's wrong to put an RPD officer or any other officer in that position. And that's what that's what this policy does in my view. But to go out and again, this could have been handled way different, to go out there and do a whole display and I think maybe I'm being too nice on the chief, but I think to make the chief go out there and do it effectively, I think is wrong. To do that publicly. there was ways to handle that would have been far more discreet and I think more professional. But again, to me, it's more about politics right now. We all know what's going on, both federally here in Rochester, and I think that's why you had that press conference. And so, we're here to let those officers know that a lot of people have their back. And I would tell the mayor, there could be, again, I was just with Tom Homan, there could be repercussions when you're doing stuff like this for the city. And I think that would be unfortunate. And then it'd be very unfortunate if that came to pass.
Chrissy Blake, News and NBC. PAB is investigating Monday. Saw some city council members have called for the officers to be fired.
Yeah.
What are those kind of thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think you could probably fill in the blank, but I'll do it for you. I think that's an asinine statement. I mean, how idiotic. And every one of those. If you are watching this and you're a city councilman who said they should be fired, how idiotic and how irresponsible. How irresponsible. That same officer will probably respond to how many other calls in those councilmen's districts in their neighborhoods tonight, tomorrow night, this weekend. And they should be fired. It's just moronic. We've reached a moronic idiot level in politics. And so there's no shortage. Jump in. There's plenty more for the party, I suppose. But people should take notice. If your councilman's doing that, they should remember that at election time. I think it's dumb. I think it's irresponsible. And I think it's dangerous to call you should be fired for doing your job. Whatever your politics are, that's fine. I think they should be fired. But, who knows? I don't live here, so I don't get a say. But maybe the people of the city of Rochester will remember that. But I think it's just irresponsible.
And also, in the note that went out to media, it said discussing legislation aimed at quote unquote uncuffing police agents. If you could expand about that legislation.
Forgive me. So what was the term?
It said emergency call for help from border patrol agents and discuss legislation aimed at uncuffing
yes.
minority law.
So our two bills. One is the Lakin law that they kind of did this on the federal level, right? We have a bill here in New York, and I'll go over some of the finer points on this if you bear with me here. Here we go. So Lakin's law would override essentially a 2017 executive order. That was from former governor, maybe soon to be New York City Mayor Andrew Cuomo, which handcuffed federal law enforcement, including ICE, from working with state and local partners when it came to dealing with suspected illegals. So it prevented them from going to courts. If there were folks that were in court that they knew to be in the country illegally, they couldn't. They were barred from accessing state courts. It also it precluded detainer requests. They changed even the incarceration. So it used to be if you were incarcerated for 365 days, it automatically triggered a deportation proceeding if you were here illegally. They changed it so that you could only be, under a certain law, only be incarcerated for 364 days so that it would not trigger that. So, that Lakin's law sort of encompasses overriding that executive order, which is still in place. Now, the governor could also get rid of that executive order as the current governor, but she has not done that. And then the green light law. And the green light law I think is very important in this discussion. The green light law actually makes it, this was the law that was passed to give illegal aliens driver's licenses, right? So you're here, but you get a driver's license. It's a non-voter ID driver's license. So you can't use it for voting or other things, but you get a driver's license so you ostensibly can get around to your job or your medical appointment or whatever it might be. Ironically, the big push was in New York City, where I'm sure none of these folks have cars because who's driving in New York City? You're taking the subway. But that aside, one of the other aspects of the law was it blocked access to DMV records for federal law enforcement. So ICE, HSI, whatever, they can't access, if they have a traffic stop, they cannot access DMV records to know who's even in the car or who owns the car. It also makes it a Class E felony if they do notify federal, law enforcement about the status of someone in the country illegally. So if they do pull someone over or they share records, so local law enforcement, I'm talking, if they participated or helped under the green light law, technically that the cop would be guilty of a felony. And that's what I mean when I just say this is upside down. This is upside down. You have someone here again, most of the time when we're talking about local police and we're talking about legal or illegal, they're not immigration officials. They are interacting with somebody, let's say, who is here illegally, because that person has contacted with law enforcement for something else, right? So they're here illegally, but the cop is responding either for a traffic violation, a traffic stop, a drugs, domestic violence. It could be a myriad of things that local law enforcement would respond on a normal basis. And so we're shielding that individual from potential, I guess, deportation or whatever process needs to happen under laws like green light. And so we passed it in 2019. We have put forward a repeal of green light for many sessions now. But I think those two laws, green light and Lakin's law, highlight how in New York we could do something at the state level that would empower not only our local law enforcement, but our federal partners to do their job. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it very much. Kevin, thank you. I appreciate it, buddy.
Yes.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Thank you, buddy. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good to see
Pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Jackie, good to see you. I was like, I was into YouTube, and I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Where they are. So I'm like, I don't want to say it. So good to see you, buddy. Hey, nice to see you as well.
A lot of politicking up here, too much for me, but I appreciate the support. I appreciate the support.
Always.